Welcome to Elevate, a Women's Leadership Institute podcast where we showcase stories, celebrate successes, and shift culture. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Elevate, a Women's Leadership Institute podcast. We have the amazing Sara Jones with us today. She is, I'm going to read it because it's quite a bit. She's a chemical engineer. She has a law degree. She is a patent lawyer. She started the Women's Tech Council many years ago, and she now leads Inclusion Pro, where she consults with companies to strategically implement DEI strategies. So across the board, she's a dabbler, and I love it. I'm so excited to get into this with you. Welcome to the series.
Thanks. So happy to be here. And I do need to add one more thought to that career thing. I was also in entrepreneurship and had many failures and successes. So, I think when you get old enough, you've got the shiny resume and you can highlight all the successes, but there's definitely been a bunch of failures mixed in between and learning. And so I did want to mention that. Yeah, I think I mentioned that because I think it's in the type of work that I do, the more business experience you have, the better, which is kind of ironic, right?
Okay.
We tend to think about certain skills that would make a DEI consultant, what are their core competencies? And at least in my line of work, I've just found the understanding of how business works is one of the key things that you need to definitely understand to be successful.
Yeah, like the drivers of it.
Yeah, how to talk like a executive, what do they care about, right? Just all of those things to really get that alignment within an organization.
Yeah. So one thing we ask guests, because I love that you said shiny and you've done it, but we also love a personal side. So could you share something personal, like favorite movie, book, an experience you had? We've had all kinds of things.
This is so timely because I got to see an early screening of Wicked last night.
Yay. Okay.
Yeah, I got...
Were you singing? That's the real question.
I was so I was struggling, and then I was struggling not to applaud after every song. Yeah. And I thought, okay, but this is an early screening. Maybe they'll applaud. And they didn't. They only applauded at the end.
Oh, man.
But I was just like, so I don't know. I don't know when this is coming out, but let's normalize, applauding for amazing singing talent on a screen when it happens. I don't know. But I'll just tell you a relevant story to my career. And one of the sort of defining moments of my career was when I was trying to decide whether to leave law and do something else. And I actually saw Wicked in Chicago live. And I mean, that intermission, Defying Gravity, blew me away. And it like broke my brain. Something unlocked in me. And it was so unforgettable. And the words kept going around and around and around in my head. And I just thought, why am I still, right? It's time to defy gravity. And it just kind of became an anthem for my life. When we did the first Women Tech Awards, it was still on my mind. That I was still at the law firm, by the way. And
so you stayed in your job, but then you just started dabbling in other things. Is that what you started unlocking?
No. My dabble was actually growing Women Tech Council.
Okay.
And as a lawyer and sort of being raised in sort of a smaller bubble, I didn't realize that I had all these other skills I could do. So Women Tech Council was kind of that training ground to do some different things, right? I learned I'm really good at strategic partnerships. I learned I'm really good at building community. I learned I'm really great at messaging. Like all of these things that you don't think of. As a patent attorney, I'm in my office, writing about inventions. Where am I going to learn those skills, right? So that was the dabbling. But it's just been an anthem. We actually named our Women Tech Award statue Defying Gravity.
You did?
Yeah, because of that song. That's
that.
The backstory, right?
Yes.
Not a lot of people know about that anymore, right? It was so long ago. It was like 17 years ago. But just this idea that we can achieve higher than we thought, right? So it's always been my musical, my film. And John Chu. It met every expectation for a Wicked fan.
I love that. Right. Okay, so you're going to see it again.
Oh, of course.
Yes. Okay. I saw an interview with those two, and it's just their marketing and their messaging is so on point. And as you started to talk, I just started to sing Defying Gravity, right? Because that is
Yes.
like, you're like possibility.
Okay, do you
When
do
when it
Alphaba or do you do
claims,
Glinda?
oh gosh, both,
We
right?
might have a
Like,
duet right moment.
let's do it.
Okay, all right.
My favorite song is the For Good, right?
Oh.
Because it's that tie-in of, wow, this has been a little sketchy, but also I've been changed for forever because of what's happened here.
Okay, so what's a stanza you want to sing?
Oh gosh. Um I've never been asked to sing on the podcast. You go for it.
Good.
Oh. I used to sing a long time ago, and the ability to have harmonies with different people
Yeah.
plays perfectly into this like conversation about
Yeah.
DEI and team building and finding your spot and where the melody is and how you can come in. And so I love that. Okay. So Sarah, let's start with Inclusion Pro. Tell us a little bit about that. Like I love that you take it from a strategy approach because often it is like a side thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us why that integration is really important for you.
Yeah, I've observed for just a really, really, really long time that we do DEI sort of the wrong way, right? The way that we've approached it traditionally. And it's just almost we got to reverse the way we've always done it. And I think, I don't know if it's my entrepreneurial background or what it is, but the frustration that we all feel like it's not really making a difference. Well, the reason why is because we're not doing it really
How
in a
it's set
way
up.
that it can make a difference,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And it feels logical, but I mean, to be real, it is harder to do it
Yes.
the other way,
Yep.
right? And flip it on its head and say, no, we actually want this to make a difference in the way that it's intended, but the approach has to be different. And of course, as you know, working with the leadership team is,
Yep.
the most difficult part of it because, um, you know, for so many of them, they haven't been exposed to better ways of doing it. They've only been
Right.
exposed to the old traditional ways. So in their minds, they're doing DEI the way that they've been taught.
Yes.
We're
that is
doing
true.
best practices.
Yes.
Right. And I think that has always sort of held us back a little bit.
Mm.
And so I actually started Inclusion Pro as I actually started it as a technology platform first.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
This is before COVID, before
Okay.
anything. I thought, I'm going to try some different approaches.
Sure.
And I actually created a minimum viable product, had 25
Of course
companies
you did.
tested, of course, right?
Yeah.
Following the process. And I realized even though companies say they want to do DI, they care about it, they don't care enough. Right. And so
or it's not consistently top of mind.
yeah. And it's not like they're bad people.
No.
It's just that they feel like what they're doing in their organizations is enough. And to adopt this technology would require, additional work. And does it integrate into my HRIS? And I said, well, I mean, it's a minimum viable product. Like, hopefully, yes,
Right.
someday it will integrate into.
Right.
But like I'm just testing for value. And I learned a really important entrepreneurial, startup lesson, which is, you have to understand the difference between a pain and a vitamin, a pain pill and a vitamin.
Okay.
Okay, I was giving them a vitamin,
Right.
and they didn't really need a vitamin. Their pain was somewhere else.
Yes.
So then I turned to consulting, which I'm glad I did because I think consulting, you get to get more into the companies
Yeah.
and really understand their pain points
Yes.
much
Because
better.
it's a culture thing.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, they're dealing, HR leaders tend to get the brunt of DEI
Right.
work. It gets put on them. It's their job. And they're struggling just enough to get a seat at the table. Even though people are like, what, the biggest cost to the company? I mean, hi. I know, right? It's
Yes.
just so many
It's
ironies
ironic,
in life.
yep.
But and then they're having to do DEI also on top of everything else. Now, we'll talk later. I don't think DEI has to sit on the HR team at all. And I think we've just kind of put it
Yes,
there
yep.
because it's about people.
That's right.
And that's why I've really shifted to talking about strategy first, because there's certain things you would never do. There's certain areas of the business you would never treat like that, right? Because they are such
Yeah.
important strategies. And we haven't really, I don't think, brought DEI into the realm of business strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think the shift needs to happen, because it better connects with what executives care about. It better connects with the purposes of the business. It actually makes DEI much more authentic than a side program.
Yeah, right now it's treated like an accessory.
Yes, on
Mm-hmm.
top of our day
Exactly,
jobs,
yep.
right? So when you hear about pain points, one of the things I hear is, oh my gosh, we're just so busy
Yes.
doing this. How
Yep.
can we add on DEI? I'm like, well, that tells me a lot about the mindset shift that we need to
Mm-hmm.
start to work on,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of times I don't go in and just say, let's go and build a program. I say, I want to discover your culture first, right? I want to
So
understand
smart. Yep.
what's going on here, because um the things I care about are actual impact, right? So like even when we started Women Tech Council back then, when they had women in tech programs, they would kind of grow and then fizzle, grow and then fizzle,
Okay.
right? So maybe they last 1 or 2 years to get a lot of excitement, and then they would
Right.
die out, right?
Okay.
And so when we started Women Tech Council, we didn't just launch it. We did a lot of discovery. We did a lot of interviewing. We said,
Mm-hmm.
how can we make this organization last for a
Right.
long time? Sustainability was really
Yep.
important. And that's how we crafted the organization. And so DEI is the same thing. We don't spend that time to say,
Yep.
what is it that's going to work in our business that we can continue to sustain, instead of just
Adding
adding
to.
to and
Mm-hmm.
requiring resources and energy that
Yep.
maybe not all of us are sure why,
Right.
right?
The actual impact, the return.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, I'll stop there. I've been talking a long time.
Well, two thoughts came to my mind. The first is this is exactly why the Elevate Her challenge is non-prescriptive, right? We don't go in and tell them what to do, because every culture is different and you need to understand their pain points. And then the second thought that came to my mind is so often like a CEO says, yes, let's do an ERG, and then gives it to an HR representative, it's usually a woman, with no executive oversight. The executive doesn't come to the meeting. And the real question is, do you have funding? Right? And many times that doesn't happen. So then we're like, okay, well, it's not really integrated at all. We need to integrate it. We don't want it just to become a gripe session. Like, this is actually something that can help the company move forward. And I feel like many people understand the importance of team building, of different perspectives, but somehow when you put that label of DEA on it, people kind of freeze up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great example. So let's use that example,
Okay.
because women's groups have been around for a very, very, very
Yes.
long time. Some done well, some not done well.
Right.
But when you put the layer of strategy on it,
Mm.
it can become something very different. So I'm just going to illustrate an example.
please.
Okay. So I was consulting one company. We've got an executive team, mostly white men,
Okay.
very open to executive coaching sessions. So we would meet with the executive team. They weren't like, you know how sometimes executives are like, well, I got an important meeting. I got a sales deal
Can
to
you wrap
close.
this up?
Do I have to attend?
Right.
It was not like that at all. It was amazing. It was such a
Okay.
really great self-aware group,
Okay.
right? Willing to be vulnerable, willing to, really go into this space of learning. And they actually came up with some really innovative ideas on their own. So what I love seeing
Mhm.
is when I can literally just sort of be in the room,
Yes.
and I can just nudge when they
create
need
the
a nudge,
space. Yep.
and create the space, but it's them coming up with the
Yep.
ideas, because I don't know, we've created this narrative that white men can't come up with inclusive ideas, right? They can't understand inclusion. They need someone to teach them what inclusion is. No, we all
No, that's so
inherently
condescending. Yeah.
know what inclusion is, right? So,
Yep.
one of the ideas they came up with was genius and very innovative. They made all of their executive meetings open to the whole company.
Very transparent.
Very transparent.
Mhm.
Private company, you can do that, right?
Yep.
But here's what's fascinating. When we talk about women in leadership,
Yeah.
oftentimes we're saying, women, you need to gain confidence.
Right.
In my experience, just telling a woman she needs to gain confidence doesn't give them confidence. What
No.
builds confidence is the ability for their talents to shine.
Yes.
When their talents shine, that's what builds confidence. So we kind of do this thing to women where we assume that they have a deficit to begin with. right?
Yes, the whole we don't come into our programs. We're not trying to fix you. We're not trying to
Yeah.
fix you
Yeah.
because you're already good.
And why do you need a program in the first place if
Yeah.
you don't think they have a deficit, right? This is kind of the this is the thing we have to start thinking about very
Mm-hmm.
carefully. Even though back in the day women's groups were very powerful for those of us who
Yeah.
felt very isolated, but the root of women's groups came from lack of psychological safety.
Amy Edmondson, right? Isn't she
Yeah.
the psychologist that started that?
Yeah.
Psychological safety is so huge.
Yeah.
I think I took this right off your website that inclusive leaders are 62% more likely to become C-suite leaders.
Yeah.
And I think in my experience dealing with leaders is it's the people who know how to create safety, right? Because then everyone can show up and then creativity flows and then your company's better.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is, again, on an example of women's groups not done well, when a man tries to join, women get upset and they say, no, this is the only safe space in the company.
Right.
And I'll tell those executives, that's really important feedback because guess what? A women's
Yes.
group's never going to make your company psychologically safe. That's
If they're separated.
well, just if women are expressing that that's the only safe space they have, but doing an ERG is not going to change your culture.
Right.
It's simply not. And we
Right.
sometimes look to these ERGs and we put too much on our
On what they
expectations are
can
too
do.
high on what they
Yeah.
can do.
Uh-huh.
Right. So an executive's like, oh my gosh, I'm so great. I
Right.
just let them do a women's group. Again,
Right.
it's kind of condescending, right?
Yep.
But so
I let them. Yep.
so let's say, this company, now they didn't ever do a women's group because I don't go in and say, oh, the first thing you do is where's your ERGs?
Right,
I
right.
actually, I have to say, I've consulted on what the foundations of a great ERG, but I've never worked with a client to build one.
Well, I
in the
love
last
that
7
because you
years.
want them to have buy-in, right? This is like teenage psychology, spouse psychology. If they think they've come up with it,
Well, my question to them is, why do you need one?
okay? And if they don't know,
And if you don't know, and if you don't need one,
Right.
you can do DEI without ERGs,
yes,
right? And no offense to women's groups and
no, of
right?
course not.
But you can do DEI without them. And we've kind of got locked into this like, okay,
Right.
like, oh, this is how you do DEI. Now, there's nothing wrong with them. And if your organization chooses to do them, be very intentional about why.
Right.
So let's say, for example, this company who expose or makes available this opportunity for any employee
Yeah,
to watch the executive team and even submit anonymous questions, let's say, right? Okay.
that's huge.
If I had a women's group,
Okay.
I wouldn't do a training, I wouldn't do a book group, I wouldn't do that. I'd say, hey, let's talk about the last executive meeting.
Right.
What questions did you have?
Right.
What ideas did you have they didn't think of? Right? Because now, what a great learning experience to address any knowledge gaps.
Yep. Or
Right.
misalignment.
Yes, because
Mhm.
we know from the research that women are less likely to be mentored into the actual strategy. They're less likely
Absolutely.
to be mentored into the business. That's why we don't see as many promotions.
Yep.
It's not because of lack of confidence. Most women are very competent and very conscientious.
I can see
Right?
that. Yep.
And so see how this more naturally and authentically fills an important research gap that we know and understand, but it feels more authentic and natural. What questions do you have, and what ideas
Yeah.
did you have that they didn't think of?
Yes. Yep.
Right now, you're allowing them to learn, but also share ideas, and you're engaging them in the business, in the business conversation and the business strategy.
Yep.
So, and they never did a women's group, but see, that's where my mind goes when we talk about a more strategically integrated
Yeah.
approach, where it doesn't feel unnatural and it's fully connected, right? So now we've got this fully connected double loop learning as well as double loop
Yes.
ideation.
And
Right?
feedback is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's, if there's any, charge I would say to anyone doing a, affinity group or ERG, it would be craft them so that their talents shine,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's what those spaces should be used for, and
Yep.
that those talents are shining and surfacing to folks so that we can make sure the right narratives are happening within the workplace.
Yes. And some companies are doing that really, really
Mhm.
well, and they seem to be exponentially growing.
Yeah.
So when we do our programs and we say, what are the things that you're hoping to gain? So much so, especially just this last year, is strategy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting you talked about that, because one thing we talk about a lot on here is women need the opportunity to practice leadership when it's not such high stakes, because um, like you said in the very beginning, it's about learning, it's about failing, it's about alignment, it's about listening. Did I hear what you said right? Like, how does this impact what we're doing? I think that's really important for women to be able
Yeah.
to do that and align with.
Can I tell you a funny story?
Yeah, please.
This is back in the early days when Pat founded Women
Yeah.
Leadership Institute. And she brought in a leadership expert.
Okay.
And he was really excited to share this data.
Okay.
And he said, our research has shown that women equal either match or exceed men in all the core
Oh,
leadership
mhm.
competencies.
Jack Zanger. Was it Jack Zanger?
Yeah.
Okay.
Except strategy.
Yes.
Okay, my alarm bells went off.
Yeah.
And then he said they show strategic competency around age 40. And so I don't know if Pat remembers this, but I started asking him questions
I bet you did.
because this is what we continue, right? That narrative. Women are not strategic until they're age 40. Oof. Let's not
Right.
put that out there. Let's instead train people to see strategic thinking in the
Mhm.
different ways it shows up. Who is he asking? Is it men? Who's your data set?
Yeah.
Because if their perception and if their bias, right? Because I hear this all the time. Women will come to me and say, I can't get promoted because they say I'm not strategic enough. Well, what does that mean? I mean,
Then they should be asking him, what does that mean, right?
yes.
They should be clarifying what people think that means.
And I just, yeah. And so and it's just a funny story that I remember because, yeah, women are capable, right? In every single way that
it's
men
that
are.
perception.
But it's the
Mhm.
perception, and his data captured the perception,
Yep.
but it was not actual fact or truth.
Mm.
And I think that's why we have to be really careful, right?
Well, like we were talking about before we started, data can be slanted however you'd
absolutely.
like,
Yeah.
right? Which is why it's both a blessing and a curse. So let's oh, I love the topic of psychological safety, but let's move on to your DEI pulse check.
Oh, okay,
talking
great. Yeah,
about
let's bridge
data.
to other data. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So I'll let you explain how this came about and a little bit of what it is, and then I've got a couple of questions for you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully most folks listening or reading to this are familiar with
Sure.
the legislation that happened at the beginning of the year.
Yes.
And it wasn't that I think we didn't know it was going to happen. I think there was some frustration from the business leader side that, we weren't really at the table. Right.
Yep.
And I can understand from legislators, they're like, it's about public offices. It doesn't concern you.
Right.
Right. And I could totally see them saying that in their minds. Right. But the reality is none of us live in a bubble, right? We're an ecosystem. What
That's right.
happens in higher ed, what
Yep.
happens in K-12,
Yep.
what happens in our government, it all affects business,
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, we were shocked that it passed so easily and without really much debate. And
Yeah.
there were efforts to, communicate the broader impacts.
Absolutely.
I'm sure which would, many unintentional impacts as well, right?
Yes.
I don't think they actually intended to kill all of
No.
these, like the Women's Center at the University of Utah. I
Yes.
don't think the legislators were like, yes, let's do that. But
Not
it
all of 'em.
happened. Not all of them, but it
Yeah.
happened. And it's really, really sad that so much of these efforts that Utah was behind, that they supported, could just
That
so
we're gaining
easily
momentum. Yep.
be undone
Yep.
like overnight, right? Really devastating. But the DEI community, as you can imagine, was very, caused a lot of emotions
Yeah.
for us, right?
Sure.
And I feel like we felt very abandoned, very sort of alone and isolated. And
what does this mean?
what does this mean? And so I thought it might be good to gather some data to just say, okay, are the impacts as bad as we really think they are?
Right.
Right.
Perception.
Yeah, is it perception? What's really happening? And so that's why I did my first study, pushed out the survey in February because it was still during the legislative session, but they signed the bill like in January. So I pushed out the first DEI pulse check in January and got perspectives from many different sectors. So not just business, it was nonprofit, government, higher ed, public. And so wanted to just kind of see the difference across different sectors of
Right.
what was going to happen.
Right.
Right.
Because the bill was specifically for higher ed.
No. It was it was higher ed, government offices, and K-12.
Okay. Because
Original, the first version last time
yes,
that they blocked
there've
was
been a
only
couple.
higher ed.
Okay.
And then they went to interim session and they
I
blew it up.
see. Okay.
And they made it much bigger and broader.
And the question was, even though it didn't impact businesses, I don't think they got that message.
Actually, it did impact businesses. Let me explain why.
Okay.
There's language in it. And the challenge is the title said equal opportunity. So everybody's like, well, that's a good bill.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so
Context.
Yeah. You have to actually read the language.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't read the language. They read the summary that's like, this is better for Utah, right? And they say, oh, okay, can't be that bad. But then read the language. You read,
yes, and we have to remind people you're a chemical engineer
and a lawyer
and a patent lawyer. So I've tried to go in and read bills. I've read different bills, and they're not meant to be like easy.
They're not meant to be easy. And but here's the thing: is people, reach out to the people who are watching the bills.
Yes, and who know. Mm-hmm.
And who know and can help inform you. I've done that as well.
Yeah.
Even on equal rights bills and things like that I don't completely understand. I've called up friends that I know are very knowledgeable. So please tell me what this is about, right? And so I think even if reading through bills and that slog is not fun for anyone, by the way, it's not even for me. but the bill has language that covers higher ed employee behavior. It doesn't cover private industry behavior.
Okay.
It's the public employees.
Okay.
So they say if you participate in any program, event, training, blah, 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 huge laundry list of activity based on personal identity. Okay. So let's bring this to Women Leadership Institute, right? You go to a higher ed employee and you said, can you speak at my event for women for women leaders?
Yeah.
Okay. The language of the bill literally covers that. If they are representing the higher ed institution, it literally covers that.
I see.
Right. It covers, and the struggle for me is those are our private-public partnerships. Those are the things that actually keep Utah running.
Yes. That
keep us connected.
Yeah.
And strengthen our economy. Yeah. And there's language that literally has a chilling effect on employees who participate in anything based on personal identity. Right? If they do a veterans event, if they do, the list could go on and on and on, right?
Okay.
It is very broad language, but that's the plain language of the statute that was enacted.
I see.
Okay. Is it enforceable? I have no idea if they're going to enforce that.
Right.
But the thing that folks are missing is that they literally did cover behavior that impacts private business and all the ways that we want. So if I went and said, hey, I want to do a recruiting event and I would like to take your women engineers to lunch. You can't do that based on the language because a higher ed employee, unless you work through like an independent student club maybe, but a higher ed employee would have to like post posters, send out an email, blah, blah, blah. That behavior is covered by the statute.
Wow, interesting. I did not realize that.
See, this is why people, I was trying to raise the alarm bells.
Yeah.
And I'm like, friends, this is way broader than.
I love that you called it the unintended consequences of, oh, yeah, that sounds fine. That sounds good. But then the unintended consequence are these specific details. And like you said before, I love your approach of the only way we're going to fix this is a full ecosystem, right? All of us working together, private, business, higher ed, like it's in all of it. So we got to work together.
Yeah. And what I think we have to be careful of, I was just mentioning this to Clint on Silicon Slopes last time was, I think, we have to be very careful about shifting too much of this to private businesses. I mean, we're already busy enough trying to keep our businesses alive.
Yeah.
Why is it our job? Why?
If business can step in, should they?
Is it their job? We care because we know how it helps our businesses.
Right.
But I don't think it's quite fair to take all of that cultural and the ability to see different perspectives and to be able to, all of that challenging our thinking, right? That shouldn't just happen in the workplace.
Right.
And it's a core skill, frankly. It's a core problem solving skill. When we think about, business and the problems that we're trying to solve, they're not just Utah problems, they're global problems,
Sure.
right? And we want our talent to come in
Right.
having these skills,
Yep.
and it's going to make them more likely to hold a job where they can really demonstrate value, right?
Mm. Yeah, it's so nuanced and layered, isn't it? Wow. Okay, so from your data that
Yeah.
you've got, because you've done it twice
Yes.
in February and then again, was it just last month,
I
September?
did. Yeah, I just released the second one in September because the bill it went in effect in July, excuse me.
Right.
So I was like, okay, after the summer's over, we're gonna do a second version of this 6 months later and do a 6 month.
Okay.
Hey, what's happened? What's really
Right.
happened? This time I added a bunch of benchmarks, not just
Right.
hey,
Yep.
what's the negativity, temperature, that sort of thing. I added a bunch of benchmarks to it because I thought, like, if we're gonna do this work, and I asked a bunch of folks, how could this be more useful? And so they did ask for more benchmarks and things like that, which again was fascinating
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
And just a couple things is it was anonymous, so it's not like I went to the companies and had
Right.
the executive responding, right? So I didn't have control necessarily of who was responding. And it is possible that more than one person from an organization
Right.
responded, right?
Right.
To be fair.
Yep.
So just kind of caveat on the data. It's a pulse check. It's not a
Right.
research study.
Exactly.
And so for you data quants out there that
Yeah.
are like, where's the R value, all of the plus or minus stuff,
Right.
this is not gonna be that for you. All right. So let's see, what would be helpful for you? I mean, it's quite an extensive report.
Okay, so let me tell you
but-
some of the things I pulled out.
Yeah.
The first thing that caught me is we talked about the unintended consequences, and three of them that I noticed that came up in the pulse check was one, long-term talent pipeline, right? Because we're always concerned about the pipeline, getting talent in it and being able to move through that. And you just spoke to that, right? Bringing people in, understanding what that is. The second I thought was so interesting, cancellation of networking and events. So again, like what an accessory piece, not a strategy piece. And then the third, abandonment of spaces and resources. That really hit me because I teach at Weber, and they had a whole section that's just now abandoned. Nobody's in there, and it's sad, right? Because people would go there for support, and I don't care why you go for support, but everybody needs support. So that one also caught my eye a lot, of abandonment of spaces and resources. I don't know. So those are a couple things that stood out to me.
Yeah, there was quite a few less responses. I mean, I think generally, just anecdotally, we've seen a lot of DEI leaders be let go from their jobs.
Yes.
And some of them voluntarily transitioned. So it's not, I'm not saying they were all let go
Right.
fire, but I'm just saying they may have seen like the writing on the wall or
Yes.
whatever.
There was definitely a shift.
There was definitely a shift. So when we talk about sort of talent that way too, it's challenging because we need to strengthen our bench with folks that do understand how DEI can strategically be done. And that takes time. Like,
That takes time.
people will come to me and say, well, how do I be a DEI consultant? And I'm like, do you got 20 years? Like, I mean, you don't just, you can't just hold out a shingle and say, well, I want to keep executives accountable.
Right.
Because I'll tell you one thing, executives don't want to be held accountable by someone on the outside.
They're executives for a reason.
Yeah, like that's not really gonna work. So
Yeah.
but building these competencies of knowing how to do strategic transformation in organizations, that is a true skill set.
Yes.
And so if
transformation.
folks leave, where are they going to learn that, right? Well, hopefully they'll continue to learn it in other ways, like I did, right? I didn't build my career as a DEI consultant.
No, yeah.
I learned it and then applied those skills
Yeah.
to a specific, area that I have a specific, core competency. But I actually do broader strategy too. So people think I only do DEI consulting. I actually do a lot of just broader organizational
Yeah.
strategy, growth plans, executive coaching,
Yeah.
that sort of speaking coaching, which is
Yes.
the fun thing that I get to do
Yes.
in my life. But the other thing that struck me on the data is we asked for team size, we asked for revenue,
Yes.
we asked for employee size, because the revenue employee size don't always match, right?
Okay.
And so I kind of slice those type of data a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And what was very fascinating, this is why when you can look at it many different ways, people would report really large DEI team size,
Okay.
but then really small DEI budget sizes.
Yes.
And I thought, okay, there may be a couple things happening. And really data for me is it gets you thinking,
Right.
right? It gets you thinking either the company is having people do a lot of free labor.
Yes.
If your DEI team's that size with, let's say, a $10,000 budget, okay?
Yep.
Or maybe the DEI team doesn't actually know what's being spent. Or maybe it's not a
Mm.
specific DEI budget. Maybe it's being pulled out of HR or
Sure.
operations, some other thing, right?
Okay.
Or that they're underreporting the budget,
Mm.
right? So somebody could look at that and they could draw an oval and be like, well, based on this
Right.
data, this is what we're going to spend because this is what other Utah companies are spending, or companies in Utah,
Yeah.
even if they're headquartered outside of Utah.
Right.
This is what they're spending. I actually think it's underreported,
Yeah, probably so.
right?
Yeah.
Because I said, okay, you got to include headcount, or you got to include your salaries in there too. So if I've got a data team of 4, I should be seeing at least $500,000 in budget, right? To keep those folks employed. So
Right.
I think just be very careful. These are the
Mm.
reported numbers,
Right.
but it's really, you got to just be very careful with how you use the data, or even just show that we tend to underreport DEI budget
Yes.
numbers.
And I love your idea of approaching it not as a check mark, oh, look at this, but rather with curiosity
Mm-hmm.
to start the conversation, to start thinking about the different ways that it might apply to the company.
There's a number of trends that I showed, and so there's a lot of trending maps. So the trending maps were interesting for me because you could see things such as, we asked, are you required by federal law to report DEI data, right? It might be EOC, whatever. Well, if you look at the trends based on certain cultural factors, like how engaged is my organization in DEI?
Okay.
How respected are the DEI leaders? How much do I trust the leadership that they're really committed?
Mm.
Just having EEO, just having civil rights at your organization, it's consistent across all Likert of 0 to 5.
Okay.
Right. So it tells me that you can have a civil rights person, you can be tracking EEO data, doesn't mean you're engaged in DEI.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because the numbers are really
Yeah.
even across the board.
Yes.
You've got to be doing something more. And this is why DEI tends to be a compliance measure.
Mm-hmm.
But people who feel like you're engaged, you're doing something else. You're doing something above and beyond, much more in the leadership realm. Right?
Yes. Yes. So I wrote down, because in your interview with Clint, you said something that I loved. If we believe in diversity, what behavior are we expecting?
Mm.
Right? Because it's not a compliance issue. It's actually a mindset issue. It's a transformation of thinking and seeing and perspective. And those are two, like you said, different skill sets. Those are two approaches to making it happen. So I really loved that about what behavior are we expecting, as we look at the data you've taken in the pulse check, as we think about how DEI is integrating or team building or safety or whatever we want to call it. I'm interested, I'm going to pivot just a little bit. I'm interested in 2 things as we wrap up here. First, for those people who are ahead of an ERG or just trying to work their way up and figure out the company landscape, all the said and unsaid things, right, that come with this. When you're in the middle, what do you do? Because sometimes it's easier to do things down than it is to go up. So what would your advice be for particularly women in that situation?
Yeah, I think this is where we get to put on our strategy hats.
Okay.
And I did a series called Strategy First DEI. And anyone who is mid or even executives, it's really an executive skill set, I think, is we do not need a program to have an inclusion lens.
Okay.
Right? So again, it's a mindset issue. When we have an inclusion lens, it deepens our thinking around real strategy.
Okay.
What I work on most is getting this thinking into actual business strategy. So there's sort of people programs,
Yeah.
but what about product? What about sales? What about customer experience? What about
Yes.
all these things that are your actual business,
Absolutely.
right? You've got KPIs, you've got business objectives, right?
Yeah.
You've got a 2025 business plan. I can kind of tell the clients who understand this and who don't. The ones who expose me to their strategy, they understand this. The ones that only keep me working with their people team don't understand this.
Right.
When you get into the business side, that's where the exciting things happen. And I think that it's sort of like when you build this competency, like people will say, for example, at one company, I hired the most diverse team at the company. They're like, oh my gosh, you have the most diverse team. I'm like, well, yeah, because the lens wasn't, I'm going to hire a bunch of different people with identity.
Right.
I'm going to really focus on the skills that I need
to
make this important project
100%.
happen.
Which is like a very human thing, right?
Yeah. And I just naturally.
Yes.
And what's interesting is I didn't even know any of these folks before. So it's not that it's not possible to hire a diverse team. Yeah. You don't have to have the network, but there's something about the lens that I've been able to apply where it's just I have it because I practice it so much that it comes naturally, and I think it opens up to much more creativity, and much more better problem solving, right?
Yep.
And I think every business can benefit from that. Every strategy can benefit from that, and it's so much easier than I think people think it is.
Okay.
And we think, oh my gosh, we have to put out this big initiative. Da, da, da. No, I mean, I'm here to tell you, you can actually start today.
Yes, like today. What could they do?
Right? And you can look at the problems that you're trying to solve, right? And you can apply this lens, and you can start asking the right questions to really surface the great ideas. So, for example, I'll apply an inclusion lens in a first executive meeting with folks. When I'm first working with them, they come up with great ideas, and I'm not saying. And my rule is when I do this exercise with them, I say, okay, but the only rule is you cannot apply this lens to HR. You have to apply it to some other area.
Meaning they can't say HR is going to do this or what?
Or they're immediately going to think of DE, right? Because I'm DEI. I already know what people assume DEI is when I get in the room.
Yeah.
So I'm there to push their thinking. I'm there to say, sure.
We're not siloing this.
We've always thought of DEI as HR.
Yeah.
I'm going to challenge you not to think of that.
Because
it's
too create easy. Better products if you know who's using the product, if you know how they're going to use it, and different people use it differently. So it just seems like a no-brainer that it's strategy.
It seems like a no-brainer, but again, the narratives of what DEI is are so locked in there that you got to work to unlock it, right? And you have to say, okay, I'm going to help reframe this, and also it gives them an out, right?
Because they can say we did it.
We did it, and also it's not my responsibility. I'm in a different department, but DEI is HR, so I'm going to tell HR what needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
And then we leave sort of reinforcing the same things we've always reinforced for decades, and real transformation doesn't happen, and then HR leaves feeling incredibly burdened, right? Yes. And so anyway, there's ways to do this that are, I think. There's ways to do this, I think, that are really interesting, innovative, fun, creative.
Yeah.
That's the space I love to operate in.
Space.
That's the space. And when I get people that want to work in that space, it is so much fun. So even as difficult as this time has been, I've been able to find people that are want to work with me and say, hey, give us a different way of looking at this.
Who are open.
Yeah.
So I have a question, because one of the things that we found, right, we work with companies who are really well established, but part of this being here at Silicon Slopes and doing this and working with founders and startups is from the beginning having this lens, right, and keeping this lens of we want to build a better product. Okay, well, who's using the product? How do they use it? What do from the ground up, instead of building your company and then saying, oh, let's do this DEI thing or whatever this looks like, right? We want to build it from the ground up. Have you, in your experience, have you seen that founders are more open to that? Startups are more open to that? Or really across the board it's the same?
I have been in the entrepreneurial space, and I just have a lot of empathy for how they just have so much they have to think about.
So much.
And so to be fair, right, it's I think it's easy in theory to say start early because it's
Yeah.
harder.
Yeah.
Because I have heard, founders say, well, gosh, I just can't even think about this until we're at 100 people. Well, that tells me they're thinking of more traditional approach to
Yes.
DEI, right?
Absolutely.
And what's kind of ironic is founders are much more open-minded to begin with. That's why they go into startups,
Yeah,
right? Because
exactly.
they're like, hey, there's a different way to do this. So
Yep.
in theory, you would think that their minds are so open, but I think it's the same thing with executives. They have so many things they're thinking about that if they feel like there's one more thing I
Yeah.
need to add, that's where it's kind of a challenge. Um, so yeah, I'm not as I mean, look, there's great examples of founding teams that have been able to do this from the beginning,
Yeah.
right? And I think it has to do with they've built a set of core values and how they work together that it's more naturally sort of
Right.
generated
Yeah.
that type of thinking. So it can be done, and I've seen really great examples of it. I don't think it's necessarily going to be done with a founding team that sort of operates one way. Now you say, hey, but here's how you should be doing it, and they're like, I
Right.
got to go raise money, right? Same with an executive team, right? And when I'm working as an executive team, if it's highly dysfunctional, no, not the right time to be doing DEI, right?
No.
I'm like, can
Because
so
there's a certain synergy that has to happen and be seen.
yes,
Right.
and
For
I'm
it to
looking
be
for
good.
a certain level of trust,
Yeah.
of vulnerability, right?
Yep.
And then that they genuinely like and respect each other, right?
100%.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's just every group is going to approach it a little bit different. But back to your original question, yes, it can be done from the very
Yeah.
beginning.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I want to end on storytelling
Ah.
because you are a coach, still are.
I still am.
Okay.
Yeah.
For
As far as I
TEDx.
know, maybe they kicked me out.
But from a marketing perspective, I'm a marketer. I believe that everything has some slant. Messaging is so important in whatever you do. So, in this realm of inclusion, of transformation, what is the story you hope sticks? What is the message you hope sticks? Whether it's the lady in middle management who's leading the ERG, what if the CEO, like, what is the story you hope sticks as we move forward in this opportunity to create safety and strategy? And
I think there is still a lot of opportunity for innovation in DEI.
okay,
And we've learned a lot of important lessons. So everybody needs to understand we have had many evolutions
yes,
of DEI.
yeah,
Okay. Thank goodness we're not back in the civil rights area. Thank goodness.
yes, we
right?
have made some progress.
But to not get stuck and to not think, oh, there's only one way or that's the right way or whatever. That is not my lived experience. And I think if we can stay open to searching for new ways, new ideas, new approaches, new words, right?
Yeah.
New messaging,
Yep.
that we will continue to move the needle for anyone who cares about this. We will continue to move the needle. But I think we have to be very cautious of looking at someone else's approach and saying, that's not the right way to do it.
Right.
Right. I think
Yep.
we need to be very cautious.
That's a very scarcity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There are many, many different approaches. And I think it's a matter of finding what works for your organization, right? And then finding the way, how do we know it's working? It's always that question. How do we
Yes.
know it's actually working? And being willing to ask the question. And if it's not working, being
Being able to
willing to say pivot, just like,
Yes.
the same principles of entrepreneurship and
Yep.
leadership.
Totally.
Pivot, right? Have a bigger vision. Who are the right stakeholders?
Yep.
All of those things. But I have to just say that I have exercised more creativity the past few years
Mm.
than maybe in other areas of my my career. And it's because I think there's something special about Utah where despite all the challenges, we have such an interesting Utah's an interesting innovation lab,
Yes.
for lack of a better word, right? It's challenging. And because we have these really unique challenges, we have to be really creative. Those of us in this space
Yes.
have to be very creative because we know we're not just going to be invited into the room, right? So this is the same challenge when we started Women Tech Council, right? How do we bring the men to the table? How do we have them leave having a great experience with us so they're not scared of
Right.
us, right? Those are lessons I learned way early on,
Yeah.
right? Because I can do my best work if I'm invited back,
Yes.
right? And you keep getting invited back. You keep getting invited back.
That's safety, right? Yeah.
Safety, and because you continue to add value.
And add value.
So that's the challenge of DEI leaders or anyone in this is the challenge for you is to demonstrate how does inclusion create value for your organization?
Yes.
Because that is something that will always resonate up and down the board, right? And that is the essential. There are many, many, many ways to do that. I'm sure I haven't thought of all the ways.
And I was just thinking there's so many ways to create value. So back to your point of like, no one person has a corner on the market.
Right.
Because there are many ways to do this. And back to the conversation of the whole ecosystem working together.
And we have to let people do this because if we look at a company, we say, well, where's their ERG? They must not care about DEI, right? Well, they might be doing a lot of stuff on the inside. You have no idea.
Don't know. Yeah, sometimes people flip right into bitter and
or judgmental,
get burned out, like really push back. But I think the other thing to say is just it's a long haul. It doesn't change overnight. Like you're not going to come in and like blow things up and it's going to be better. Like it's a lot of.
Actually, I recommend you don't blow things up, right? Because.
And if you want to, like, talk to your other friend who wants to blow things up and then go and have a real conversation, right?
Well, the question is, are you going to be invited back?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the challenge is in theory, we all want to disrupt everything.
Yeah.
But like there's a reality to it.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
And we can do our best work when people want to hear what we have to say, when they know that when we say it, we genuinely are interested in their success. We're not there to pull them down. We're not there to put them in their place.
Yep.
We actually want them to succeed.
Yes.
And bridging that, especially given the context, that immediate trust isn't there. And so we've got to work to build that trust.
Build it.
Yeah.
I think that is a great place to end on.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Anything else you want this audience to know? So much experience, so many things.
I'm always open to feedback.
Okay.
So, and I would say I'm always open to very innovative ways of doing DEI. I started a series this year, just my Inclusion to Innovation series.
Okay.
And started to kind of highlight some really interesting people who aren't quote unquote DEI experts, but it shows up in the way they have made certain business decisions. Stuff. It's super cool. And so if anyone has an example, maybe, I'll do a podcast with them and highlight them. It was just something that I did to just kind of bring back the positivity, the good news, right? That of course there's a bright side to inclusion.
Yep.
It's not all negative and it's not all going to destroy your company. There's real value to be had. And we've got to talk about that more and remind people.
Instead of the fear of,
nothing to be afraid of, right?
Nope, absolutely not. And everything to gain.
Yes, right.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Patty. It was a pleasure.